Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Kent City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. Today is Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021. This is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 health and safety requirements and by order of the governor. Welcome to anyone that is joining us today on Kent TV 21, on the Facebook City of Kent page, also our YouTube channel, Kent TV 21, and anyone that is calling in this afternoon. We will go ahead and get started first with the roll call.
Thank you. Council President Troutner?
Here.
Councilmember Boyce?
Here.
Councilmember Fincher?
Here.
Councilmember Core?
Here.
Councilmember Larmer?
Here.
Councilmember Michaud?
Here.
Councilmember Thomas?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. Moving on to the approval of the agenda. Do we have any changes from council or staff?
No changes from staff this afternoon.
All right, we will get started then with department presentations. And the first one is the American Rescue Plan Framework Committee. And Derek, do you want to tell us about that?
All right, thank you, Madam President, and good afternoon, council members. So a couple weeks ago, Congress adopted and the President signed the American Rescue Plan Act. The act includes $65 billion in what's called coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds for local governments. And here at the City of Kent, we expect to receive $28.41 million. Those funds can be used through the end of 2024 for responding to the pandemic, covering costs related to the public health emergency, replacing lost, delayed, or decreased revenues due to COVID-19, addressing negative economic impacts on local businesses and nonprofits, and making necessary investments in infrastructure. So staff is suggesting that the council form an ad hoc committee that would meet for approximately 1 month and then recommend to the full city council a higher level framework to invest Kent's fiscal recovery funds. The committee could consist of the mayor, 2 council members appointed by the council president to represent different viewpoints on the council, the chief administrative officer, and the finance director. And the committee could operate on a consensus model. And then once the council adopts a high-level framework, the council could use the same committee or an entirely different approach to make recommendations on specific investments that are consistent with the framework. So the motion in your packet this afternoon would be for the April 6th full city council meeting, and it would form an American Rescue Plan Framework Committee consisting of the mayor, 2 council members, CAO, and finance director to recommend to the city council a high-level framework for allocation of the coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, anybody have questions for Derek? All right, so is everyone okay moving this forward to form this committee? We can put it on the consent calendar. All right, wonderful. Great, thanks, Derek. We will move that on to the consent calendar. Next up in the agenda, we have this information only, a resolution regarding council bylaws, rules, and procedures, and also eliminating committee of the whole and establishing various committees. And I'd like to have Derek start us off with that.
All right, thank you, Madam President. So the council decided back on February 6th to eliminate the committee of the whole and return to a standing committee format and to assign a subcommittee to work on the details. A committee on committees that consisted of Council President Troutner, Council Member Fincher, and Council Member Boyce met in mid-February and presented its recommendations to the full council on February 23rd. The council agreed with the committee's recommendations to reinstate the former Public Works, Parks and Human Services, and Economic and Community Development committees, and to create a new Operations and Public Safety Committee with 7 members, and to launch the new committee structure in September. So over the last few weeks, the city attorney and I have been working on some revisions to the council rules that would officially enact the council's direction. And as is the case, every time we open up the council rules, we find things that are perhaps inconsistent with recent case law or inconsistent with the city's current practices. So Pat is going to walk you through a draft and highlight the proposed changes that implement the new committee structure and some housekeeping changes. And then he's also going to tee up a policy question on the extent to which you want to permit remote attendance by council members in light of your experience with remote meetings during the pandemic. And then finally, this afternoon's item is information only. The plan is we'll incorporate your feedback and then return to you with an action item in the near future. So I will turn it over to Pat.
Thank you, Derek. Hi, everybody. I think my video is a little dark here, so I'm going to try to move over. I've got a very bright window behind me. I hope you're all doing well. As Derek noted, we've been working on the resolution here, and so I'm just going to go through it page by page. I also want to note that I just sent you all an email because I realized when I opened the council packet that's online, there's a sidebar note on the council packet that runs through the comments. So if those interfere with your ability to look at the comments, I just emailed you a copy of these, so you have a copy of these without that sidebar on the right-hand side of the pages. So first things first, before we get to the rule part, I wanted to draw your attention to Section 6 of the resolution. And Section 6 establishes the effective date as August 30th. That was our understanding of when council agreed that these would go into effect. Of course, there's one section, and that is selection of committee members that needs to go into effect early, and I called that out. And that's just so that we avoid any Open Public Meeting Act violation by selecting the committee members outside of the public meeting process. So little simple issue there. So I'm going to run through the exhibit, which starts on page 11 of your packet. It's the first page of the actual bylaws, rules, and procedures. And I'm going to go through most. There's some very minor changes here that are correcting some grammatical issues. But the first, so let's just start out here with 2.1. And if you guys have questions, feel free to jump in and interrupt me. Section 2.1, nothing in our rules speaks to the potential that presidency position will become vacant midterm. So I included a section there. I'm going to change that word elected to selected, but it just says that if the term of the council president becomes vacant prior to the scheduled end of the term, you guys will select a new president. So pretty simple stuff there. I don't know that really needs to be in there, but we might as well cover it. So moving on to page 12 of your packet, page 2 of the bylaws. We made this change to recognize that the mayor does not sit in on the agenda meetings. The chief administrative officer is the one who confers with the council president on this. So that's reality. So this change, eliminating the mayor as coordinating the agenda, just reflects the reality of how we've done it ever since I've been here. So pretty simple, straightforward change. You'll notice I've had to remove references to committee of the whole throughout the document, and you'll see that, and I'm not going to specifically comment on those. The comment or the next page, page 13, that change is just a simplification of the language. There's no substantive change on that. The issue that Derek mentioned is on page 14 of your packet, page 4 of the bylaws. The question is whether council members want to have the ability to attend some meetings remotely. This is something that was just analyzed by the Attorney General a couple of years ago, before COVID actually. According to the Attorney General, they believe that it is not a violation of the OPMA to have individual board or council members to attend remotely. That's currently not permitted in your rules, except of course we're doing this by emergency order of the governor. We've been having our meetings remotely through an exception in the law as passed under an emergency authority of the governor. So the question is whether post-COVID you want to allow council members to attend meetings remotely. I do have a couple suggestions if you're wanting to consider this, and I would suggest that you limit the number of meetings that a council member can miss. The concern being that a council member might much prefer to attend remotely and very rarely show up to in-person council meetings. The second one I'd recommend is that there be some kind of process for approval. Under state law, if council members miss 3 consecutive meetings without approval of their board, they technically are removed as a council member under state statute. I've never heard of that happening, but this is just akin to that process. As you approve absences in your agenda, I'd also suggest that you have an approval of remote meeting attendance as part of the process if you approve this. I would also suggest that you have a limit on the number of council members who would attend remotely at one meeting, because you might have members of the public show up and every one of you wants to attend remotely that night, and that could be that might not go over well. And then finally, I think it's important that if you permit this, that you do so for the benefit of the city and not necessarily the individual council member. And that's just to recognize that the purpose of this is to continue the group as a whole meeting, ensure you have a quorum, allow some exceptions in emergency type circumstances. So those are just suggestions if you're interested in permitting this as part of the council. And I don't know if you want to stop here and discuss this, or if you want to talk about this later, or not at all. I'll take the message if you don't want to talk about it at all.
Well, Councilmember Boyce, you have your hand raised, followed by Councilmember Court, and then Larmer.
Thank you, Madam President. Thanks, Pat. Just my thought on this particular matter. I think we should continue to allow council member when needed to be remote. My only thing I would say that, there probably should be at least 2 council member at the meeting, and 1 could be remote. And the reason why I say that, let's say we had some technology difference, right? If 2 people remote, there's only 1 present, and for some reason technology is technology, it would cause problem for the meeting to go forward. So my only caveat be at least 2 have to be in person and only 1 could be remote, just to make sure that we can keep the meeting going. That's just my only thought. Thank you.
Councilmember Court.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Pat. I agree with Councilmember Boyce, and I think we need to take in consideration what some of our council members who've had health issues, right? And they want to participate in the meetings. I think we should take that in consideration. So possibly have some sort of, wording in there that says, if, doctor permits or something, right? They want to attend the meetings, they should be able to virtually or over the phone, because we've seen this works for most part. So, and I think it's a good point. We should have at least majority of the council members attending in person. Mm-hmm. And emergencies happen, things happen. So, that's going to be up to consideration and at the time discussion, but I think we should definitely consider the option.
Councilmember Larmer.
So I agree with everything that's been said. I think, potentially, do we want it to be a majority or a quorum? I think, if we word it as there must be a quorum in person, would that take care of different meetings, different sizes? So that might be a change. And then I'm also wondering if we want to give somehow a preference, like we'd prefer it to be video if possible, depending on, I'm not sure what the technology in the chamber is, but I think either one's fine, but I think it's always nice to see a face, even if it is remote.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some way to word that if that's even possible in chambers. I'm not sure how that works. So just my thoughts.
Great, Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to go on the assumption that by the 1st of September that we're going to be back to, quote, normal, and we'll be in the chambers. Excuse me. Second, think about this. As a member of we are a member of the council, but we also are a member of the community. We can, like in the past, attend any meeting that we want to. However, you can't always participate. And that's where I would ask Pat to limit the number of participations, from the council members. If they want to listen in, even though they're not a member of that committee, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Just a thought. I like the quorum idea too, by the way.
All right, Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. I agree with what everyone said.
Councilmember Fincher.
I was just going to put my hand up to vote. I like the having the quorum present on the dais. So, and I'm good with the rest of it.
All right. So, Pat, I think we gave you answers to most of those questions. The only one I didn't hear is, do we kind of want to do this on a case-by-case basis, or do you guys want to have a limit of, say, 3, you can do 3, kind of try to make it 3 Zoom meetings per year if that's, something to happen. I mean, is anyone okay with that, or do we just want to kind of leave it?
I wonder, should we make it 3 unless pre-approved or something, kind of to Pat's point of having an approval process, so that if there is maybe a lengthy health condition that would go beyond 3, that would be permitted with special permission. But I like setting 3 as the standard limit.
I think that way we all know that it's really important that we be at meetings, but something may come up that you can't be there. It just means that you're not doing it all the time. And then Pat, you also said, if you're not going to be at a meeting because you're on vacation and you're not going to call in, council excuses you for that. The same thing would happen if you're going to be participating via Zoom. We would note that during the meeting. Is that true, Pat?
Yeah, I think it would be important to just note attendance remotely, just so that everybody so the public understands who's there, especially if they're listening in by telephone. The other thing, I located this issue in the context of council meetings. It sounds like you want to allow this for committee meetings as well. And I think it's the concept of keeping a quorum physically present is probably a good idea, because if otherwise you potentially could have one council member in the committee meeting and 2 remote, which it just might be uncomfortable if public show up and whatnot. So thoughts about that? So if we go with the concept that a quorum has to be in person, and that applies to committees, you will always have 2 committee members present, with the exception of the operations committee, which will have 4 of you present.
I think we're all in agreement of that, Pat. I guess the only clarity I'm not too sure on, so for the council meeting itself, when we're on the dais, does this apply as well to that as well too? Or are we strict?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, both.
All right, gotcha. Okay.
Perfect. Derek, do you want to comment?
Sure. Speaking of the difference between council and committee meetings, rather than setting a limit of 3 meetings per year, you may want to say 3 calendar days per year, because if somebody's gone on a day when you have operations and public safety, workshop, and council, there's your 3 right there.
Right.
Good
Perfect.
point.
I think that's
great point.
Good catch.
great. Really great suggestions, everyone. Pat, does that answer all of those questions?
It definitely gives me enough to bring something back to you for some hard language that you can look at
Okay,
and consider.
So I have one more question, if you don't mind.
go ahead.
Thanks. There's my hand. So if I just heard Bill talk about this, if you have a council of the whole, well, just council now, meet, then there's supposed to be 7 of us present. But you're saying that, hey, even if I'm not sick, I could just say, I'm not coming today. I'm going to go Zoom in. I don't have to be physically present.
Correct. That's the concept. Yes. It would allow you to attend remotely at least 3 times per year is what I'm hearing. And if you had a medical issue that needed, and you could not attend for, say, a month because of a major medical issue, then maybe the council would have the opportunity to approve additional days that you could attend remotely.
I see.
But Les, I would hope that you wouldn't attend just because you don't want to attend. I mean, the idea is
hey, a day off. All right.
I would hope that we would all be present as much as possible. But
I hope so. I think that's kind of our responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it that way.
All right. Anybody else want to comment on this, or can we have Pat move on? All right. Go ahead.
Okay, so just to close this out, I will draft some language and I will bring something back to you for your consideration there, so make sure I caught all your points. The next issue is on page 15 of the packet, page 5 of the bylaws. This just allows something to be added to the agenda by a majority of the council. I would note and remind you that under the COW, 2 council members were permitted to add something to the committee of the whole agenda. That process will continue to apply to the committees. So 2 council members can add something to committee. And for the council agenda itself, that's something that I theoretically would not have gone to committee first. It would take a majority of the council to add it to the full council. And that typically, that's when there's the question of whether the agenda should be approved at the beginning of a council member. That's essentially what you're doing. So that would be the point where council could, by majority of vote, add something to the council agenda. Otherwise, everything's going to go through committee first. Does everybody understand that?
Yeah.
Councilmember Lumber, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I think that was my question. I just want to be clear then. So we're saying, by saying majority, we're saying 2 members could have something added to a committee.
Right.
And then 4 members.
Right. That's later on in the rules. That's addressed in the committee section of these rules.
Okay. And then for full council, it's 4.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Okay, I ask a question. Okay, so what about if we want to bring something to workshop?
Good question.
Those workshop isn't really addressed in the rules. It's just a workshop has been something that's been very staff directed, to be honest with you. But I think that is maybe simply a call to staff asking something be put on the workshop agenda. And workshop agendas are typically established far in advance because they typically involve larger presentations. So I think we handle that pretty, Derek, feel free to jump in, but I think we handle that kind of on an informal basis when there's interest or staff feels there's something of interest to council that needs a larger presentation with explanation, oftentimes not an action item, then that's really staff driven, but there's no reason a individual council member can't ask something be put on the workshop agenda.
And I know Councilmember Michaud, you've done that several times, which have been really great suggestions. And we've brought those forward. So Derek, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just note that, Pat's right. That's generally how it works. Your current rules actually have the council or 2 or more council members provision that would remain in the rules. So it's technically the council president, 2 or more council members can put something on a workshop agenda.
Councilmember Thomas.
So if I follow that, normally what I always think of if I'd like to have something put on a workshop, I would approach the council president and bounce that off of her or him and go from there. Isn't that the way you've kind of done it?
That, or I know, people have suggested things to Derek, or, we may have had a conversation as a group where a topic came up that we thought would be a good idea. But if anybody has any ideas that they want to see come to workshop, just put it out there to Derek or I. And
okay, that's
so far,
what I
for
need.
the most part, I think anything that's been suggested, we've brought forward. So, Councilmember Larmer.
Yes, I just wanted to kind of trying to think through a hypothetical. So if we're in committee and we decide that, we're not ready to move something to consent, but we feel like everybody needs a presentation or needs additional information or a presentation on it, would that be something, would we have the ability in committee to move it to workshop for full presentation? If we feel
Not the workshop necessarily.
So right now, under the rules, you have the authority to put it on other business of the council agenda for full conversation there and consideration.
Okay.
That's typically what happened. And then, workshop is almost a backward step, really. Workshops are typically reserved for large informational type items. And committees are where we handle things that typically would go to the committee of the whole. That we need to have actual council action on. So I would just say that probably the best result or the most efficient way to address it would be for the committee to vote to put it on other business.
Okay.
And
Marty,
so theoretically there'd be a staff presentation at that time.
Okay.
Marty, you suggesting committees to hold again when you say that, Marty.
Well, no, I'm just thinking sometimes there's an informational that it's like, okay, well, yeah.
I would say also, for the most part, when you look at the workshop agenda, they're pretty much 6 months out in advance too, right? So, but I think, for the most part, if, any of us want to see something come to a workshop, we should be able to work it through the council president and try to be able to bring that forward, and they'll make adjustment within the workshop. But for the most part, there are 6 months already scheduled out, and the staff is fighting in a good way, trying to get in front of the council. So.
Very true. All right. Everybody okay with this? Okay.
All right. So moving forward, the next one is on page 6, page 16 of the packet. Some of this is just cleanup. So there's a bill right now in the legislature that I think is it's expected to pass. And this is going to require us to continue to provide remote attendance to council meetings. This kind of ties into the previous discussion we had. So regarding council members appearing remotely, but the bill before the legislature essentially adds into the OPMA, the Open Public Meetings Act, a requirement that we allow the attendance of the public remotely in our council meetings. So the lessons learned during the COVID environment are that I think more people have the opportunity to attend when you have remote meetings. And it's looking highly likely that will be passed by the legislature. I think it's passed both houses. So this acknowledges the fact that we will continue to have remote attendance available to the public. Any questions on that? It's a lot of red, a lot of verbiage, but that's all that really does there.
No, Pat, just one quick question on public comment, because typically during committee meetings, we didn't accept public comment. Is that outlined in here?
We did a couple times in parks.
Yeah, the committee meetings, I think we're all over. I think that some committees did allow public comment and some didn't. So I think that's, we still have to see what happens as far as the state statute, I believe, applies only to council meetings themselves and not necessarily to committee meetings. But that's something that I will look into and ensure that we have that this language is consistent with that. I don't think this really requires us to open up public comment at committee meetings, but it certainly does require attendance, I think. So I mean, I need to look into that further, and I will do that before we come back with this next one.
I guess I will hope that I mean, I don't want to get too tight where we can't do anything. I think those should be up to the committee chair, right? They should be able to, and I've seen it work both ways, right? So
Yep.
I will hope that we'll lead it up to the committee chair. I mean, I can't see why we would not have people to speak to us. I mean, so I will be less concerned about that and let that be up to the committee chair.
Right. So I just want to be clear. The rules that we're talking about now are applicable to full council meetings.
Right.
And the committee meeting rules are further along. We'll get to those in just a minute here.
Okay.
But this new issue just it requires the ability to admit comment remotely, essentially, and we have the capacity to do that now, and we're just going to have to continue that, even though our meetings will return to in-person meetings in the future. So it doesn't necessarily apply to committee meetings, and I recognize that we don't always take comment at committee meetings. So, all right, moving on here. Let's see here. Flip too many pages. Hold on a second. The public demeanor section is just simply a cleanup, and they are intended to be more consistent with state law. We really haven't had these issues, but that's really one of those things, as Derek noted, that we review these over and over and over, and it's this is just intended to clarify the language to make it easier if we have to present. If we're presented with disruption during a council meeting. Okay, the next one starts on page 7 and moves on to page 8. There's a section in the current council bylaws that allows the council to remove one of you if you're being disruptive, and I'm not so sure that's legal, and so. I'm suggesting we strike this, and I just beg you all to continue to get along like you do. But I don't see this as being an issue, but I am concerned that this might not pass legal muster based on the potential for a constitutional right of a council member and the statutory duty you have to serve the public. So this really goes to the ability of people to be cordial and respectful during a meeting. There's no problem here, and we just thought it's time to take that out. So,
Councilmember Thomas, do you have a question?
Yes, Pat. What about? Thank you, Madam President. Pat, what about closure?
That's a different. So you're talking about dealing with an issue when the public is disruptive. Is that right?
No. Actually, a council member is potentially not now, because I know we get along pretty good, but. There could be a time, and I can remember some things in the past, before any of us came on even, where things got a little out of control and things had to take place. So I know it's not addressed there maybe, but it's in the form of a discipline by the entire council. I mean, I don't know if you want to bring that up at this point. And if I can go back one place, we did actually, it was before my time. They did actually remove a gentleman, Jim, I can't remember his last name, from the council for missing 3 meetings. And it happens.
Right.
Not very often.
Yeah, that's a statutory issue. That issue is covered by statute. State statute says when a council member has 3 unexcused absences, they are removed. They are no longer a council member by operation of state law. The issue that this deals with is disruption of a council member on the dais. In that case, I think the council could vote to close the meeting and shut it down and come back the next time, or try to assess it that way and then move on to a censure process. But I don't think there's really any ability to have somebody removed from the meeting. That could put the council in a pretty tough position, and that's what I'm trying to protect you all from.
Could the council president have a recess for 5 or 10 minutes, then take the individual out in the hall and whip them? No, I don't mean that literally, but I had to do that one time in Olympia. It's very awkward because you don't want to, do something really publicly, but you need to take them aside or her and have a little talk with them. And I don't know.
Right. I think the appropriate approach would be to have a motion to close the meeting, or take a recess from the meeting and try to handle the issue that way, depending on how bad the circumstance was.
I've even seen where they went to executive committee. Is that right? Yeah. And handled it that way, just within themselves.
Not sure that would be an appropriate use of executive session, but I will have to cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, I want to know what Les is planning.
Revolt.
All right, so moving on. Thank
you.
You're welcome. So on page 9, we get to the real meat of what you were looking for. This is what happens when you get a lawyer involved. We're not even to what you asked for yet. We're just getting there now. So this is the establishment of the committee system. You'll notice that we establish the 4 different committees. You have the Operations and Public Safety Committee, which is a committee of the entire council. And the council president is the chair of that committee. And then you have 3 of our former committees, which are the Economic and Community Development Committee, the Parks and Human Services Committee, and the Public Works Committee. They are made up of 3 council members, and they have the schedule. The Operations and Public Safety Committee will meet 2 times per month. Public Works will meet 2 times per month, and the other 2 committees will meet 1 time per month.
I have a question about operations and public safety meeting twice a month. I've always heard that the operations agenda is fairly light. Did public safety always meet twice a month?
Public safety met 1 time per month in the past.
Okay. Do we have a need for that to be twice a month?
I will defer to you all for discussion on that.
Molly?
Go ahead, Bill, because you were on off, so go ahead.
I think everything's going on now with public safety, right? Out in the public. We just felt there's a need for us to really kind of stay engaged and stay informed. So it's just based on where we are today in our society, that we think that'd be a good thing. Maybe 2 years down the road, we can revisit that and change it. But as you know, Marla, there's a lot of stuff going on, so that's the reason why for that.
Okay.
Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. I thought that my recollection was that we did mention that they were light committees and that they would meet 1 time, and that other Monday could be used for one of the other committee meeting days, especially since it bumps up to a council meeting day. And that was partially thinking of staff and staff time.
I don't recall that.
I think we were kind of leaving it up to the chairs of those committees to determine when they went into meet. And there was talk about maybe doing 2 committees on the same day. But again, it's up to the chairs of those committees when they would like to hold their meetings.
But that was also just saying that what I recalled was the 1 time.
Oh, just 1 per, you mean like Public Works just having 1 meeting a month? Parks?
Right, because it was said that those committees were light. So.
But I think, Brett, we also talked about too, and I know this came up, where we end up at, I don't know, but I know we had discussion around the reason why we combine those two, because we figure Operation Public Safety is important to all of us, pretty much what
Right.
we hear, right? And
Mhm.
so much going on today with public safety that I think that's the reason, at least that's my recollection on why we decided to kind of go. I think we also decided if there's nothing there, we can always say not have the meeting, right? But I think it's probably best to have a placeholder than not to have a placeholder. So
And I could go either way, just recounting the conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
Thank
and
you.
I think, Brenda, we were looking at Public Works always met twice a month. So that will meet twice a month.
Yes.
You would meet once a month in Parks. So I think the only difference would be the ops and public safety is twice on those off Tuesdays, and then Public Works. So
Right. The only one I was questioning was the
ops.
PD.
Okay. Council Member Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. This is difficult for me to bring up, but all the members should know that we're breaking a long ways from tradition here because the operations chair has always been the most senior member of the committee, with the exception of Dana a couple of years ago. I'm just bringing that up. I know I'm left out in the dark in this one, or left out in the cold. I don't know what you call it, but if that's what the committee decides to do, I have to go along with that as well.
And Councilmember Thomas, I know you and I have talked about this
I know.
multiple times, and I know that was kind of an understanding, but it
was more than an understanding, Tony. It was a tradition, and we've broken with that, starting with Dana. And you're still the council president, no matter what. But anyway, I just getting my 2 cents out there.
I appreciate it. Councilmember Larmer.
Yeah, so actually, I'm glad you brought that up, Les. I had never heard that. I didn't realize that, Les. So I think that's interesting because I wanted to ask about Council President serving as the chair of this committee. It was my understanding that the Council President would not chair this committee. So I think perhaps maybe, I see the benefit of having the senior most council person chairing it because, especially with operations, they're going to have, a lot more experience. And I'm guessing, Les, that had to do with kind of why that tradition was established for the experience. So I would, I think maybe in lieu of the council president, maybe it should be the senior most council member serving as the chair of that committee.
Well, and I know I did say that I wouldn't chair a committee, but I don't look at myself as chairing that committee. I look at myself as conducting the meeting.
So we could change the wording to the council president shall conduct this. Okay.
Sure. If you're okay with that, Pat, that works for me. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. I know that when we had our meeting, I was one of the ones who brought forth that concern from talking to my fellow council members when we were prepping for that meeting. And changing the wording doesn't change the responsibility, really, of the job. I thought that, as with the other committees, the group would get together and then select somebody who would be the chair.
Councilmember Boyce.
I just think, a lot of things get changed, right? Nothing in writing. And I get, what you're saying. I mean, I think there's a role for the council president. One day we all may be there, right? So to facilitate a operation meeting or facilitate a public safety meeting, I mean, that's what it's doing. Everybody get the input. Everybody have to say so. So I prefer leaving it the way we have it. If you want to change the word to facilitate, I mean, I think that's okay. But really, it's just facilitating the meeting. So, a lot of things have been changed in Kent over the last 100 years. So, and things will continue to change as we go forward.
So, sorry. No.
Councilmember Core.
Thank you. I tend to agree with Councilmember Thomas here because even when I worked for the council, he was the chair for the operations. And I've seen the most senior person serving as the operations chair. So I tend to agree with him on that statement. Thank you.
Okay, Council Member Thomas, do you still have your hand up?
I do, Madam Chair, if it's okay. I hope by this vote, you're not saying that I did a poor job, because I also chaired public safety for several years. I chaired the operations for almost since the get-go under Mayor White. So I don't like experience in that field. So when Tony called me and discussed this, I'll be honest, I was hurt. And I still am, I guess. I'm still reeling from that. But I'll do what you guys want. So, okay.
Councilmember Larmer.
Can we clarify? I think I want to clarify the role of the chair in any committee. It's working with staff to set the agenda. And then, although we do have the 2 council members can have something added to an agenda. Is there anything else in that chair role? I think that will help me make a decision.
Yeah, so you just hit both points.
Okay.
The committee chair, and that's in section 4.5 of your proposed rules. In consultation with city staff, committee agendas will be established at the direction of or approval of the committee chair, provided 2 or more council members of the council president may place items on a committee agenda or refer matters to committee.
Okay, and then it's just facilitation of the meeting itself. Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, I like Les's idea of seniority, just because I think that is important, especially in ops. That would be my preference, followed by then just general appointment, I guess, by the agreement.
All right, Councilmember Boyce.
I don't know. First of all, it's not a union, right? I mean, seniority don't mean anything, right? I mean, it does mean something.
Excuse me?
It doesn't mean that you're the smartest thing in the room, right? We all
Well, I'm not saying that, Bill.
I'm talking, please. We're all equal council member, right? I think one day everybody could be in this council president role, and I think there is a role for the council president, and I think we should not necessarily look at the individual. Let's look at the council president as the council president and not look at the person, okay? And I think we need to be careful about what we do today that could impact us tomorrow, right? So, I just think we should leave as is. We don't have a problem that we're trying to fix, right? So if it's working, then so be it.
Bill, I don't want to be the council president. I'm asking because I won't get a chance. This is my last term. You guys will probably all have a turn to be, and Bill's been it twice, president. I don't want to be president. I think
Councilmember Boyce brought up some good points. We are making a lot of changes here. We've gone from the way we had it before to now we're going to, we went to committee of a whole, and now we're going back to these individual committees. So I think this is an opportunity for us to structure it a little bit differently. I think you need to put all of that aside, and we're kind of looking at a clean slate because we're making a lot of different changes here. And I think that, as the role of the council president, a year from now, it could be somebody different. And I would think that if you were in that role, that leadership position would be very appropriate for the council president to run that particular meeting. It's a meeting with all of us, and it's a meeting where we're discussing finances and we're discussing public safety. 2 things that we said is very important for all 7 of us to see together. And I think, if you put yourself in that council position role or president role, you would want to be chair of that. It's appropriate for you to be chair of that particular committee moving forward. Council Member Larmer.
Actually, I'll defer. I'd like to hear from Councilmember Michaud and Core.
All right, Councilmember Core.
Thank you. And putting myself, if I were to ever run for council president, I would think I want to give opportunity to another council member to run operations or public safety, because I would get to still be, I still mayor presides over the council meeting, but I'm still, I'm still the council president. So as I've seen it, that's just my opinion here. So, and I tend to agree with council member, what's been said by Councilmember Thomas and Councilmember Larmer.
All right, Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. So I understand both sides here, and I was going to say something similar to what Councilmember Core said about the council president will still get to preside over the workshops, and you're still a council president. And this would also give another person an opportunity for leadership. Also, I don't want any hurt feelings. I don't like the way that this is going. It doesn't feel good. So that's just my opinion.
All right, circling back, Councilmember Larmer.
I think my fellow council members have expressed it well.
All right, Councilmember Core. Oh, anybody else have hands up? Anybody else want to comment?
Yeah, I'll make one last comment and I'll let it be. And I think most of you guys who know me, I'm all about transparency, right? And I think you got to call it like you see it, right? And I just think, in my opinion, I really think we are focusing on the person, which I don't think is fair. And like
Which
I said,
person?
I'm talking, please.
I hear you.
I think we'll focus. Who the council president? That's what we're focusing on, and I called it like I see it, right? So this is my opinion, and I think it's we just need to be careful, because hopefully all of us get to be in this role one day, and in my opinion, we should spend less time talk about the person and let's talk about the role and the responsibility. And I'm gonna leave it like that, and I have nothing else to say.
So thinking of that particular thing, is there a way maybe, Pat, at the end, that we can say that the chair would be chosen in the such manner as other committee chairs?
Yeah, I think, yes. But I do want to address, that means that we're going to need to address section 4.3, because currently the council president appoints committee members and committee chairs to each committee.
Yep.
So I'm not sure that will specifically solve this particular issue.
The council president would then get to appoint that chair?
Yes.
Okay.
You can't appoint yourself, right? So, which is too bad, right? So
why couldn't I appoint myself?
I guess not, I don't know.
Councilmember Larmer.
I just wanted to make a comment based on Councilmember Boyce's comment. This is not about the person to me. This is about a, sort of a consolidation of power and a distribution of power within the council. And I think, I think all of us here today are looking at it as that and looking forward, knowing that, these roles are all going to be different. We're all going to be, we all have to do what's going to be good for the city council in 5 years and 10 years and beyond our own terms. So I just wanted to be very clear that this is about a distribution of power and control, and it's not about an individual person. Thank you.
Marley, you and I would strongly disagree. Okay.
I would agree with that as well. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. I'm going to agree with Councilmember Larimer, not only about power and control, but also a thought, adding to that thought. But I do like the idea of having it spelled out that it is either the president or the person with the most seniority, whatever, that we have it spelled out so that it's in here, at least, the next council, the next council, the next council, until they decide to change it, it is spelled out.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher. I do want to say I feel like from the very beginning, this whole process has been very personal. And I think it is personal on the person. And I just want to get that out there. I feel like it's my job as council president to conduct meetings and to be a leader amongst this group. I think I've done a very good job so far. I have compromised on multiple things. I have given multiple council members opportunities to rise when it's appropriate. And I do feel that this is personal. And I just want to get it out there because I agree with Councilmember Boyce. It's nothing against you, Les. I think you've done a great job. I think that if we're going to change this process, I think that this is an appropriate role for the council president. So I don't know, Pat, we probably have not given you anything to move forward on this unless, that last piece of suggestion will work.
So this is my understanding, and I might need some correction here, so I apologize in advance if I need that. So what I'm hearing is that under 4.1 on page 20 of your packet, 10 of the bylaws, under number 1, Operations and Public Safety Committee, the language will be changed from the council president shall serve as the chair to the council member with the most seniority will serve as the chair. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, repeat that last little part.
So the question is whether that last sentence, it currently says the council president shall serve as the chair of this committee. Should that be changed to the council member with the most seniority shall serve as the president of this committee? I think that's what I'm hearing as a majority of the council members deciding.
I think you say president. Are you saying chair, not president?
I'm sorry. Correct. The council member with the most seniority will serve as the chair of that committee. That's what I'm hearing.
Council member with the exact same seniority, because that could be possible to come out the exact same time, right?
Right.
True.
In that case, you could tie it with a selection, or you could break the tie in terms with a selection by vote of the council, I suppose, by selection of the council.
I feel like if we're going back to selection of the council, then we're back, Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. The others are not selection of the council. The others are selection of the president, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Maybe this one should be selection of the council.
No.
It's so
No.
You ain't gonna do that, please. Oh man.
I think it should be consistent.
Yeah, should be the president.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing then, and correct me if I'm wrong, the chair of the Operations and Public Safety Committee will be the council member with most seniority, and if there is a tie, then it will be selected by
the council.
The council, a vote of the council. Okay.
Yep.
And then all other committee chairs, and this is in Rule 4.3, which is on page 11 of the laws and 21, all other committee chairs will be selected by the council president, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Pat, is it just not only the chairman of each committee, but the members themselves? Am I correct in that?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, all right.
Yep. So that's what I've heard, and I'm ready to move forward if you all are ready to move forward.
Can I make one other statement, please? If I'm going to chair a meeting, I know we talked about this earlier. Is it important that the chair be part of the two people that show up personal?
Yeah.
Because, I don't think the chair can be the chair can't be remote, shouldn't be remote, and other two here. So if you're the chair, you need to be here.
Yeah.
I would think so.
Do we all agree with that?
I think so.
Well, I will hope so.
I think it'd be really hard to chair remotely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I've made a note of that.
Be at a meeting that someone else can chair it rather than you chair it remotely.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Tony, if I've offended you in any way, I apologize, because I am loyal to the bone as you as my president. You are my president until the end of your term. I don't know if you misread something along the line, but I'm not power hungry. I'm not after anything in particular. I just want to make sure. I love tradition. I love this council. I love this city. And I think you're doing a great job. You lead great meetings. You keep things moving very quickly. You facilitate things nicely. So I have no problem there. I hope you know that.
Thanks, Les. I appreciate it. All right,
Should I
Pat,
move,
I think we can
move forward? Okay. All right. If you turn to the next rule, which is 4.2, this rule, which starts on page 10, page 20 of your council packet, this discusses the flow of items to be considered by the council. A council, typically before a matter goes to the full council, it has to go to the appropriate committee. In special circumstances, and this has come up in the past, when there's a time crunch or some time issue is involved, a matter can be referred to a different committee to ensure that it goes through a process. It's not something that happens commonly, but there are some times when you will have a committee that meets one time per month and they have an emergency situation that needs to get on the council agenda quicker than the calendar would allow, so it can be sent to another committee. I think most often the operations committee would be appropriate. And then in some circumstances, a matter can skip the committee process and go to other business on the agenda of the full council. So that will require approval of the council president. And again, that happened back in the day when we had small committees, when we had emergency and timing related issues. If we did not have time to go to committee before full council, it would go on other business and there'd be a presentation for full council consideration. So this is just the process of the past put into writing. Any questions on that piece? Okay. The next rule, 4.3, this we've talked about this a bit. So this provides that within 8 weeks of the passage of this resolution, the council president will appoint committee members and committee chairs to each committee, and those terms will typically be for 2 years. And the council president will retain the right to remove committee members and committee chairs and to reappoint new council members to fill those positions. This is a carryover from...
A green thing.
This is a carryover from old rules. Sorry about that interference there. And then the only new thing in this rule that is not a carryover from past rules is we didn't have a rule relating to an issue when a council member steps in to fill in an unfinished term of another council member. This would allow the council president to appoint that new council member to committees. Of course, that already happened. It just wasn't written. Any questions about that rule in particular there? All right. So this is a new rule, me making sure you don't violate the OPMA. And it just means that your first committee meetings are going to be set during a council meeting. And then thereafter, the committee chair can set times and locations for meetings in consultation with the members of the committee and staff. Of course, staff have to be available to staff the committees. And then requires a process for posting of committee times and dates and locations on our city's website. I assume there's no questions on that. Pretty straightforward stuff. Committee agendas are established by the committee chair, provided that two or more council members or the council member or the council president can place items on a committee agenda or refer matters to committee for consideration. That too is a carryover from former process. All right, the next rule, 4.6, is also a carryover. Matters considered by a committee and unanimously approved for council consideration by the committee in attendance at the meeting shall be placed on the council meeting consent calendar unless otherwise directed by a majority of the members of the committee in attendance. So if you approve something by a majority or by full vote of the committee, and it's automatically going to go to consent unless you say otherwise, and it needs to go to other business. That was typically reserved for issues that you felt the entire committee needed to hear some particular point of that process. Okay, the next issue, I don't know that we really need to talk about. It's just a issue of quorum, except that one council member might fill in for another council member. There was a time when council committee used to vote on behalf of each other, and that was not permitted under the law, but it happened for years in Kent. But that's not permissible. But if you're going to have a prolonged absence and there's a concern about a quorum, or if we just need 3 committee members there, you can substitute on people's committees for them to create, to establish a full committee. I would say that that's very helpful to ensure that things are put on the consent agenda and things go smoothly. So that's a process that was actually quite common in the past, quite common for committee members to sit on a separate committee in another committee member's absence. Any questions about that? Okay, section 4.8, executive session. This states the obvious. It doesn't happen too often, but this just provides that an executive session can happen at the committee level. And then we have the next rule simply provides that special meetings of the committees can be called. You just have to remember that the agenda on a committee meeting, if it's a special meeting, it's going to be set. No late additions to the agenda will be permitted under the OPMA. And then the other final rule is just to provide that public demeanor, council member conduct, parliamentary rules, those things apply at the committee level as they do at the full council level. So any, any questions about those rules? Okay. Next is just doing some minor changes to the council workshop rules. Of course, we have eliminated the committee of the whole there. You see that on page 13 of the resolution, page 23 of your packet. Section 5.1 of the rules again acknowledges that it's the chief administrative officer and the council president that establish workshop agendas. The other stuff is mainly just cleanup. If you have no other questions, there's really no major substantive changes to those rules for the committee, and almost a committee of the whole, but the council workshops.
I did have a question, Pat.
Sure.
I'm trying to read through the strikes. I think it's actually section 4.8, but is there 2 4.8s? I'm seeing one called committee reorganization that was struck, and I just had a question as to why that was struck.
Sorry, can you give me a page?
Oh, sorry. It is packet page 22, bylaws page 12.
Okay. Well, this is kind of unnecessary language because you all can reorganize yourselves any way you want anytime. So it doesn't really need to be stated. That's what you're doing right now, actually. So, so it's just an unnecessary and unnecessary rule.
Okay. I just want clarity on that. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions. I think the plan will be that we will take the comment in consideration. I'll work on these. I'll run them through Derek, and then I think it'd be best to bring these back to another committee of the whole to just make sure that we have captured all of your requested changes. Does that sound like the appropriate approach?
Councilmember Fincher, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you. And it wasn't necessarily on a deletion, but can you give me an example of why we would want to suspend the rules? For instance, section 318. Actually, it was in there a couple of times, but it doesn't have to be specific to that, but just give me an example, please.
Well, this is kind of give you an example. Let me think about that. I feel like I'm in law school all of a sudden. But I think, this is really an issue with Robert's Rules of Order, a motion to suspend the rules so you can act outside of the formalities of the meeting process. So if you wanted to reorder the agenda at some point, the reality is if you make a motion to suspend the rules, you could make a motion to work outside of the agenda too, or you could make a motion to reorder the agenda. You could make a motion. I guess those are the best examples I have, Councilmember Fincher. This is really a carryover from the Robert Rules of Order. And the fact of the matter is our rules acknowledge that if we don't specifically follow Robert's Rules of Order and no council member objects, then it's a non-issue anyway. So that's probably an insufficient answer for you, but you might want to suspend the rules to add something to the agenda late in the process, late in the agenda, maybe. So you can make a motion to suspend the rules and then make a motion to add something to the agenda, I suppose. That's one example of how it could be used.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, anybody else have any other questions for Pat? All right, that gives you stuff to work on, Pat.
Yep, that's okay. It's my job. All right.
Do you want to keep going with our next agenda item, which is the ordinance establishing a 40-day notice?
Sure. All right. So this is, I'm bringing this back to you, and this is regarding the additional notice for termination of a month-to-month rental agreement. At your last committee of the whole, I presented this matter, and we talked about adding a provision to the ordinance that would allow an agreement between a landlord and a tenant to waive this 40-day time requirement. And so I created a provision that's subsection, if you look at section 1 of the ordinance under subsection E, which is page number 31 on your packet, it provides that the 40-day notice requirement can be waived by mutual agreement. It must be in writing, and that agreement must be made at the time the 40-day notice is required. It would not allow this to be waived as a condition of renting in the first place. I think that was a concern that was raised. So I think that captured what the council was interested in including. Otherwise, I have not made any changes to the ordinance. And if you all approve, we can move this on to the consent agenda for the council.
Councilmember Fincher, you have a question.
I did. Thank you, Madam President. So on, it was A, the date where it talks about the date of issuance shall be the date the notice is deposited in the U.S. mail system. So that is a different date in cases, some cases from the postmark. So are we considering that really we need to be the postmark? Or if I put it in there Friday night and it's a box that doesn't get picked up until Monday?
Theoretically, that could be an issue. I think, there's a number of ways that you can handle this. You can, if you need something that's very specific and shows service, you could do a certified mailing. Theoretically, you could require personal service, which is very expensive, and I wouldn't recommend you do that. My thought is that the landlord would provide this, and if this issue were to ever have to proceed to a legal proceeding, they would have to sign an affidavit swearing under penalty of perjury the date upon which they put that in the mail. So this is just the way I thought was the most reasonable approach. If there's something else necessary, that's certainly, we can have that conversation for sure. Because the landlord's going to deposit in the mail, they're not going to know when it's going to be stamped, right? You can't tell if it's stamped that day, the next day, a day later. Maybe it gets shuffled for a day or two in the U.S. mail system. So that was the thinking behind that.
Could we go with postmark?
You can go with anything. So certainly you can go with postmark, yes.
Then I would suggest postmark.
Okay. That's a fairly easy change.
It makes sense. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Thomas?
You're muted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Pat, so explain to me why certified wouldn't work, because it's fairly reasonable as far as price, and it's marked, dated, numbers there, in case there is any kind of question, legal question.
Right. My understanding, though, is certified needs to be signed, right, by the recipient.
Oh, I see what you're
And so
getting
if the
at.
recipient isn't available to sign or doesn't come to the door, there's just potential for a delay.
Okay, gotcha.
That's my
Thank
concern.
you. All right. Makes sense.
Member Larmer?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree. I like postmark. It just removes the ambiguity and difficulty, removes potential argument.
So with that, I think we have consensus on that. So I will change that to postmarked by the U.S. mail system. And with that change, are you comfortable taking this to the consent agenda?
Yep.
All right, I'm seeing lots of head nods, so we can go ahead and move this forward with those changes.
Okay,
All right.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Pat.
All right.
All right, up next in our agenda, we have the interlocal agreement for the purpose of pooling sales tax receipts with Skip and Merina.
Good evening. You have in your agenda packet the interlocal agreement for the purpose of pooling sales tax receipts. This is with Skip, and it will allow the Skip cities to administer those funds. So I have a super brief presentation just in case it's helpful to have the background information on this again. So if this all feels a little familiar, it's because you have already entered into a Skip ILA, and you have also already authorized the mayor to pool 1406 funds back in 2019. So this is more a technicality this evening than anything. But the other cities that are part of this ILA include Auburn, Burien, Covington, Des Moines, Federal Way, Normandy Park, Renton, Tukwila, and King County. And that 2019 ILA that you entered into really serves as a more broad framework for all of those entities. Next. And just in case you need a quick refresh on the 1406 funding that is inherent in this ILA, you will recall back in 2019, the state passed House Bill 1406 to provide a new affordable housing revenue stream for cities and counties. So not to be confused with last year's 1590. I knew that might happen, but this is in the form of a credit against the state share of local sales tax. So it was not a new tax in and of itself. Since June, the city has received a total of just over $160,000 total. I think our anticipated annual revenue at the beginning of this was going to be around $185,000 per year. I checked in with Paula this week, and it sounds like on average we are collecting around $20,200 per month, although those receipts have fluctuated anywhere between 16,600 to nearly 24,000. As for the purpose of the 2021 ILA, essentially there was some concern in another city that the original ILA was not sufficient to account for pooling the 1406 funds. And in my experience with these large multi-jurisdictional cooperative agreements, we often end up going down that road of most resistance versus least resistance. And honestly, that is really pretty much what happened here. So the 2021 ILA before you today explicitly allows each of the parties to pool the tax receipts. Again, pooling is just a great way to leverage the funds, and that multiplier effect is really at the heart of SKIP's goal to maximize the impact of the tax funds authorized by the RCW. And ultimately, the control still rests with the city. So before any party's pooled funds can be awarded or distributed, it will come back to the legislative body. And Mayor Ralph accepted the role of chair of the SKIP Executive Board for 2021, and I continue to participate in the SKIP Staff Committee. So just wanted to make sure you know that we are very involved and engaged in all of this work. And I know that if Angela was here tonight, she would express her appreciation for the councils that have remained committed to pooling the SKIP or the House Bill 1406 funds through this long process. Individually, those funds don't amount to very much, but collectively they will bring in close to $1 million a year, which is really giving us the potential to make a big impact in South King County. And I know many of us, especially council members, are really eager to see some tangible results. So getting the SKIP Housing Capital Fund stood up is one of those critical behind the scene pieces of work that will help us get there. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions, although I did tell Angela she didn't need to be here this evening. So hopefully I can answer anything that you might ask.
All right, anybody have questions for Merina? Councilmember Fincher.
So have we reached conversations, or how are conversations going with King County as far as them also pitching in? Any word on that?
Pitching in
as in part, I'm sorry. So we're pooling our funds, and so wanting to know, are they working at all with us looking at funding? Have there been conversations as to they would also pull? I know the money, they're not getting money from Kent, but as far as, are they being helpful at all, citing, anything like that, as far as citing?
So King County is a member of SKIP. They will not be pooling 1406 funds with this, but they are they're participating in all our discussions relating the capital fund. And, we continue to have conversations with them about 1590 funds. So there's a little bit of confusion, I think, for a lot of folks on which is which. But yes, the 1406 funds were specific to cities.
Thank you.
Councilmember Larmer.
Thanks, Council President. So Merina, so the Housing Capital Fund, which is that the objective of just the 1406 money, or would we be putting 1590 into that fund as well through SKIP?
Yeah, that's a great question. The original ILA spoke to standing up a capital fund in the future and didn't have any specific information at the time about 1406 or 1590. We really had no idea when we entered into that original ILA that either one of these funding sources would be made available. So the hope is that once we have the structure in place, that 1590 funds, any other state funding, federal funding, grants, anything that would be appropriate for those capital funds would be able to fold into the same pot of funding.
Great, thank you. That's good news.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions for Merina? All right, so this would be to authorize the interlocal agreement for pooling our taxes with SKIP. So is everyone good with moving this forward? Okay. So we will move that forward to the consent calendar. And next up, we have
You get to keep.
Marina, you're going to talk to us about human services funding update.
Yes, and I'll try to go quickly. So again, over the past year, we have shared updates with you on our strategic planning process, our application cycle, as well as the Human Services Commission review process. So tonight, we're going to come back and talk more specifically about the allocations and the contracting process. So just a bit of background information as a reminder, one of the primary human services roles is that of a funder, and we allocate both city general funds and federal CDBG funds to support a network of services to respond to community need. We are one of 17 cities participating in the HSFC, and applications were open in 2020 for 22 contracts. I always want to mess that up. And funding decisions are made by our commission, although we do occasionally use an outside review panel in special circumstances. This is just a visual reminder of the various elements of our funding cycle. So while we tend to talk about it in terms of a process that occurs every 2 years, it really is very much ongoing. And we are currently kind of at the end there, somewhere between contracting phase and then the monitoring phase, where agencies will be reporting their first quarter progress to us in April. And this slide is really just to give me a chance to acknowledge how much time and effort goes into the contracting process itself. It really is not as simple as it sounds on the surface, and there are a lot of steps involved. And some of these steps have steps within the steps, but it's also one of those things that involves several other divisions and departments. So parks admin, legal, risk management, the mayor, and staff in the city's clerk's office are all part of this process. So when you think about COVID and virtual work, it really has been an adjustment to get this contracting process done. And I just want to thank all the city staff and the agency staff. It took a lot of effort to get these contracts fully executed this year, but we learned a lot. So I think going forward, like I said, we learned a lot, and we'll continue to use a lot of that going forward. So our current human services funding sources can be divided into 4 primary categories. General fund and CDBG are our 2 primary ongoing sources of funding. And again, our funding is established by ordinance. And just as a reminder, our per capita rate is around $8.12 right now. That was based on 2019 population. Our allocation for this year was roughly $1,050,000. And then CDBG is an entitlement grant for Kent, and that is based on a funding formula that is established by HUD. Our entitlement grant usually hovers around $1 million, and that does have very specific federal guidelines that we have to follow attached to it. And then in terms of number 3, occasionally over the years, we have had access to special pots of CDBG funding. It isn't very common, and sometimes it is based on an application process. Sometimes the funds flow through the state, and sometimes, as in the case of CDBG CV1, the funds came directly to us. So these are one-time funds, and this specific pot is very COVID-19 specific, and it has to deal directly with the impacts on or preparing for and responding to. So these are really tricky to administer and require a lot of extra monitoring to ensure we aren't duplicating other funding efforts. This is honestly a really real risk for us because it has a significant risk in terms of if we did duplicate funds, HUD could actually make us pay those dollars back, and we wouldn't be able to use CDBG. We would have to use general fund to do that. So we're very, very overcautious with where we expend those funds. And number 4, lastly, thanks to mayor and council, sometimes we have funding pots or other outside grants that allow us to try some pilot projects or target a specific issue. The youth mental health funding that you'll hear about a little bit later would fall in this category. the $100,000 for our opportunity fund, that pilot project that you guys allocated in the budget last year, would be included in this pot. And then for the purposes of tonight's presentations, I'm not going to include our 1590 funding. That will allow funds to be allocated for specific services, because we'll be coming back to you at a later date for more on that. So as mentioned before, in 2020, we did undergo a human services funding allocation process with a new focus on equity and impacts of COVID-19. We received over 100 applications for more than double our available funding. We were able to fund some new agencies that we hadn't funded before. That includes Bridge of Promise, Community Network Council, Consejo, Eastside Baby Corner, El Centro de la Raza, Institute for Family Development, the Iraqi Community Center, Mercy Housing, St. Vincent de Paul at Holy Spirit, Utopia, Vine Maple Place, and World Relief. And then additionally, we allocated those CDBG CV funds. So this graphic includes both our Human Services General Fund and our CDBG Public Service Funds. So as you can see, over half of our funding is allocated to those categories of basic needs, physical and mental health, and as well as that stable housing category. So a lot of the really core, what we would call basic needs, would fall into that. And I would say that this is fairly in line with past funding years. We really don't have targeted percentages when we go through the allocation process, but we do try to ensure that we fund services all along that continuum.
Councilmember Lumley, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, Merina, so physical, mental health, and stable housing, those to me seem like basic needs. So what is that other basic need category? What am I missing?
So it's more food, utility assistance. I'm actually going to show in a couple of slides later some of the programs that fall under these categories, because I know it's a little bit squishy when you look at it this way.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So this graphic is specific to our first round of CDBG CV funds, which are those special one-time funds. Again, I mentioned that they're intended to respond and prepare for coronavirus. And as you can see, the vast majority of those funds went to basic needs assistance. And I know, I'll just mention it really quickly, that a lot of you are eagerly waiting to see what we do with our CDBG CV3 funds. And I just wanted you to know that we're still continuing to work on that. We're going to use some of our CDBG planning and administration funds to hire a part-time staff person to help us get those funds out the door. It's just really time consuming, and it's so critical that we get it right, both for us and for the community, that we just feel strongly that we have to add some internal capacity to help get that moving. So we'll come back with you with that.
Thank you, Council President. Merina, my question was about that. There's in the packet, it says 65,000 TBD. So that is for the CDBG CV funds. And I was just wondering what that TBD meant for the future.
I am going to see if Dinah can jump in and answer that. Are those funds that we are reallocating, Dinah?
I'm not sure what you're referring to. Is that something in the packet?
Yeah, it's a 2020 CDBG CV programs, and it says 65,000 at the end of the page. It says to be determined.
That may be leftover funds. Those may be leftover funds. We had some funds that did not go forward, so that might be referring to that. I think that's referring to those leftover funds. And we already have substitutions for those contracts.
So yeah, what happened there was some of the organizations that we originally chose to fund, once they had their contracting process meeting, they decided that they were not going to have the internal capacity to manage a CDBG CV grant. It is a lot of work. So we always try to make sure that everybody really understands what goes into that. And so occasionally we do have organizations that decide that they don't have the capacity to accept that grant. So those were reallocated, and I'm happy to provide that information after the meeting.
Yeah, we may even have to do some pre-planning this time because we really wanted to get the funds out to some of the smaller organizations, and some of them thought they had the capacity to do some of this work in hindsight when they started to see all the paperwork that they had to complete, especially for the rental assistance. It's quite a lot. Some of them just don't feel they have the capacity to do it. So I don't think any of those grants are actually rental assistance grants, but reporting for federal grants, it's just a lot of work, and HUD has added a lot of extra layers to this for the CDBG CV funds.
Yep, and I did just confirm with our grants management specialist that is indeed what that funding was referencing.
Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Madam President. So my question is related to what we were just talking about. What happens if these organizations for either fund don't end up using all the money? What happens to those extra funds?
CDBG, we will reallocate those funds, and oftentimes we can reallocate to an existing organization, or if it's a service that we really need, we'll look for a substitute organization. For example, one of the grants that did go forward was the King County Bar Association. So we're looking to reallocate those funds to another legal services program, because it's really important to really make sure that people get rental assistance, legal assistance from, with landlord-tenant issues that they're dealing with, and other legal matters related to coronavirus. So, but we do reallocate those funds. They don't get sent back to HUD.
And similarly with general fund, we recapture those funds as well, and we can roll those forward. Okay. So this next series of slides really just further breaks down that first graph that I showed you. Like I said, I know those categories in the pie chart aren't necessarily intuitive. So this allows you to see what type of programs we are talking about in each of these priority areas. So I'm just going to kind of have Kim, you can take a peek. So this is really just some of the programs: basic needs, resource and referral, emergency assistance through Catholic Community Services. These are more of the economic, legal, financial services that we are funding. So there's some employment in there, our immigration legal program, some job training. And then this is where a lot of the physical and mental health funded programs come into play. So dental care, medical care, crisis line, some of our DV advocate programs, mental health, counseling, our PATH homeless outreach, and our mobile medical program. When we're talking about safe and welcoming access, that would be some of these systems navigation type programs and multicultural family support, some refugee case management, some outreach specifically at Holy Spirit, our Russian-Ukrainian Refugee Assistance Project through Ukrainian Community Center, and some of the programs offered at World Relief. In terms of a good start, this section is really focused on some of the early learning that we fund. So childcare, financial assistance, our homeless childcare program, some pediatric therapy, and some early learning. These programs are more focused specifically on youth, so mentoring, the Kent Youth Education Program that Coalition for Refugees from Burma is running, Teen Link, some academic coaching, Kent Youth and Family Services after school program, and family support up at Appian Way.
So Member Fincher, you have your hand raised.
Thank you. Would you go back one, please? Might be the one before that. The one with the child, there we go, the child care resources. So you're doing, helping people pay for their childcare?
Yeah, Lori is the contract monitor for this specific program, but essentially it's a scholarship for families who make just a bit too much to qualify for DSHS child care. So it's essentially a scholarship to help bridge the gap so people are able to go back to work and pay for childcare.
Good, good, good. Good to know. Thank you.
And then these categories are smaller. While it looks like we're not investing a ton in healthy aging, I just want to remind everyone that we kind of look at everything that the whole city says in terms of this. So we have a senior center that provides a lot of support to seniors, but we do fund Catholic Community Services to do volunteer chore. We fund Sound Generations to provide volunteer transportation, and we fund the Kent Senior Counseling Program that Valley Cities operates at the senior center. And capacity building is something that we try to fund a little bit of every year. It's a little bit outside of what our normal human services grants fund, but we think that it's really critical work and will help, build capacity in our community-based organizations going forward. So this year we split it between two organizations, so Community Rise and Seattle Foundation's Neighbor to Neighbor program.
Councilmember Lammer.
Sorry. Marina, on the healthy aging, so yeah, that does look like a small amount of money, but we also distribute quite a bit that comes in through the veterans and senior levy, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of that is going through the Parks Department, through the senior center specifically.
Right. Okay, thanks.
And then in the area of stable housing, of course, we have our programs offered by Catholic Community Services, which includes the Community Engagement Center, our shelter services, which in the past would have been called Home and Women's Home, but now we're funding whatever shelter we can that's provided to our Kent homeless population. Our Dawn Shelter and Housing, Hospitality House, KYFS's Watson Manor Transitional Living Program, Multi-Service Center, and St. Stephen Housing. The Vine Maple Place is a new program. Their Stable Families program will be funded this year. The Y, their Arcadia Outreach, Case Management and Drop-In Center, and then the YWCA, their Anita Vista Transitional Housing up in the old Nike Manor site. And then Kim, if you could pull up that allocation spreadsheet. Sorry, I couldn't find a way to get this in the packet. Actually, I think this is, see, now I'm like blind. Oh, this is actually Lori's. There should be another document in there. I know we're both being pesky tonight. It should say, I saw it in the folder. I think it's that. Sorry, guys. Yes. So if you could just kind of scroll through this, it'll give you more of an idea of just all of the organizations that we are partnering with. So this also includes some of the CDBG CV3 partner organizations. And I just want to thank Caitlin, our grants and accounting analyst, for pulling all of this together. There's a lot of really great organizations on this list and some new ones that we're really looking forward to working with this year. But again, it's a lot of contracts. It's a lot to manage. I know it was kind of nice having to sign these all electronically this year. I'm sure the mayor probably feels the same way. You'd sit there signing all these and your hands would hurt. But this year it was just clicking buttons. But yeah, so it's a lot, and it's a lot of really great programs. And we'll definitely come. Oh yeah, so there's some of the CDBG CV programs if you wanted to take a peek at those. A lot of food assistance, a lot of housing assistance, rental help, some small business assistance. Oh, there's the TBD. Yeah. So we'll get you the more specific information about that. But yeah. If there's no more questions on that, we can go back to the slide deck, and it'll be on the puzzle piece one. Oh, that's still Lori's. We made it nice and confusing for Kim tonight. There we go. So, as impressive as that list is, I think it goes without saying that the level of need will always be higher than the allocation. So I just wanted to, rather than solely focus on the dollars out the door, just wanted to remind everyone that in addition to funding services and managing those contracts, we're also involved in many other ways that leverage other resources and support in the community. So that includes things on that list like that national, state, local policy analysis and development. So we assess local needs and trends, and we watch out for best practices. So we're really always striving for improvement in the best approach. We provide technical assistance. So maybe it's not necessarily city funds, but leveraging other funding sources. We work really hard to develop partnerships, both with other government groups, but also just within the community to really help strengthen our safety net. And then we evaluate our investments. So what are we missing and what can we do better? And then I just wanted to throw this in as a reminder. We contracted with Equitable Future earlier this year to conduct an independent equity analysis of our grant cycle from beginning to end. So we're really looking forward to coming back to share more about that with you during a future presentation. Lori and Dinah and I got kind of a sneak peek at some of the outcomes from that work and some of the recommendations that will be coming forward. And it's really great. They had a great experience working with our community organizations. They got a ton of interest from both organizations that chose not to apply for funds and organizations that applied but did not receive funding. So a lot of really valuable feedback that will help shape our plan going forward there and give us some really solid recommendations, both in the short term and the long term for where we can improve. And then with that, if you guys have questions, happy to answer them. I do have Lori, Dinah, and Christine on the call just because I would love to be an expert in all of these programs, but I am not. So they really are the ones doing all of this work with the partner organizations. So I wanted to make sure to acknowledge their time and how much they do with the community. So please let us know if you have questions. And again, thank you, Mayor and Council, for your support. We definitely couldn't do this without you. And I know it means a lot to the community and the organizations who are on the ground working hard to meet the needs of our residents.
Thank you, Merina. Anybody have any questions or comments? All right. Thank you so much for all that information and keeping us updated. And now we get to hear from Lori on the mental health funding update.
Good evening, and thank you so much for the opportunity to provide this update. Just as a sense of the background, first I want to thank you for this allocation. Even before COVID, we heard often from community that increasing supports for youth mental health was critical and important. To prepare for the RFP, we talked to youth providers, Kent School District, King County Best Starts, public health, and reviewed a lot of research and data. We continue to work with youth organizations, the school district, Cities Rise, and other funders to ensure that youth have better access to services, to train staff and increase capacity. And particularly important is to address the stigma surrounding mental health conditions and services. So those are things that are yet to come. And I'd say doing this RFP process really reminded me that we have amazing organizations in Kent doing this work. So the first slide. So during the process, you allocated an additional $200,000. It's one-time funding to support youth mental health. In February, we released the RFP to support youth mental health and emotional well-being. We were expecting to be able to support 4 to 6 organizations, and we received 16 proposals with a request of $782,000. So clearly the need is great. And then next slide. The criteria for the RFP, we really established that it was really specific to youth 10 to 18. There are additional supports that are rolling out and that we've seen for younger families, particularly infants and young children. But this was an age that we really felt there was a gap. We wanted to specifically target culturally competent and linguistically appropriate services to reach those communities most impacted by COVID and the stay-at-home orders. Really supporting and promoting supporting mental health in non-traditional ways was something we wanted to look at. So this is beyond treatment of mental health or substance abuse kind of disorders. It can include that, but it's not exclusive to that. And then priority is given to proposals from community-based organizations with integrated social services. And I wanted to say a little bit about that. One of the things that we heard was that youth are particularly having trouble right now staying engaged with the virtual format and the stay-at-home order. And so while there are multiple slots for traditional mental health programs and services, many are going unfilled. Organizations that have a variety of programs that include social development and trusted relationships with families and youth were identified as a promising practice to better connect youth to services. So we really saw this as a way to take the trusted relationship and social activity and match that to getting kids access and encouraging them to stay in their mental health treatment programs. So the real priority was around integrated social services. And then also where staff leadership and board reflect the community of the prioritized services. And then we really focused on organizations based in Kent and serving Kent youth. And finally, a requirement of all our funding is that they must be a 501c3 and of course provide insurance and a non-discrimination policy. Next slide. So the review panel, we did have 5 external reviewers and myself. We divided into 2 teams and each team reviewed 10 proposals. A little bit about how we selected the panel to review. So we wanted a diverse pool and we identified reviewers that had mental health or youth development expertise. Some were funders of mental health and youth development programs. We were hopeful to find people, and we did find people that had strong knowledge about Kent. And we had reviewers that live in Kent, that had previously lived in Kent, went to Kent high schools, have graduated, and one is in college and one has graduated from college. And just really, we tried to identify some youth to review the grants, but too many of the youth that we identified were connected to organizations that were applying. So that ended up not working out. Thanks, Kim. Next slide. So this is about the process. So the review criteria and guidance, the alignment with the RFP announcement criteria, so the criteria went through earlier, and the use of funds permitted really was a strong guide in the review process. Proposals providing substantial information, a good understanding of the program to be implemented was also important, and then the program can be implemented upon contracting. So we did receive some proposals that were, we plan to do this, or we hope to do this. We're going to take some time to develop a program, and we really went with ones that were really ready to implement soon. There are a couple that will be summer programs, but they are very clear in what their program will contain. So we went with that for the review process. So the next slide. So the recommendation is to fund these 6 organizations: Community Network Council, Consejo, Glover Empower Mentoring, Hmong Association of Washington, Restore, Assemble, Produce, and World Relief. And you might notice that some of these organizations, I think 2 of them, Community Network Council and Consejo, were also mentioned in Merina's presentation around things that we fund. This funding and this is very different than what we're currently funding them for. So for example, Consejo, in our other general fund, we're funding domestic violence services, and this funding is very specific to youth mental health. So these are the 6 organizations. And then the next slide is the place. We have a placeholder. I know that you have the allocation spreadsheet, but we also wanted to share it here. One thing that you'll notice about the spreadsheet is that it is a little bit over the $200,000. So we are identifying other funds that we could potentially leverage to cover some of the activities like staff training or other supports to build capacity that aren't included in the 1590 funding, but we found was really critical and important. People made a really good case in their applications about that is how you can sustain long-term capacity in organizations, is to train staff on recognizing mental health conditions, for example, or how to make better referrals and things like that. So the stronger proposals and those that were funded, recommended for funding, include they had activities specific to addressing mental health, that they connected youth to formal mental health services, counseling. They had existing relationships and engaged youth most impacted by COVID, and that there's a high probability of the program continuing after this one-time funding ends. Programs not, proposals not recommended would include things, not all of these, but some of these are the things that were included, are things like the program was maybe broad youth development, which is very important, but they didn't make a specific tie to mental health. So again, youth development, very important, social development, but we were looking for that specific tie to mental health. That organizations maybe didn't currently have a youth program and we're proposing to start a youth program. Programs, some of them were more family or parent focused, which again, critical, important to include the whole family or to think about the whole family, but the 1590 funding is specific to, that we have access to, is specific to youth for this RFP. And then some that didn't focus on those most impacted by COVID or more inclusive of any youth can come to this program. And then the final thing was we did have some proposals that were very strong in asking for rent assistance or tuition supports. So again, the tie to mental health was not as clear. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have specifically about that funding list. But otherwise, go to the next slide is, I think, maybe the end. So what we do next steps are we'll be working with organizations to identify the indicators of success. What we're looking at right now are things like access to mental health services, quality of life that would include improved relationship with parents or other family members, plans for the future, satisfaction with life, and decrease anxiety or loneliness. So we're going to work with organizations and other funders to identify specific indicators. We'll develop the scope of work and enter into contracts. We'll, of course, collect data and the lessons learned throughout the grant period. And we're continuing to identify opportunities to leverage other funding for mental health supports. Everything that we do in our regular monitoring, so, they'll be doing quarterly reporting. They'll be tied to service units and what they're accomplishing. So everything that we do with our other funding will be tied to this process also. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
So Lori, do they have to show a reimbursement for these funds, or do they get the funds outright at the beginning?
So they bill quarterly, and so they do the service, and then we fund. We don't ask for receipts, like how they spend every dollar, but certainly if somebody might call and say, our scope of work will be really clear that they can't use it for rent assistance, or it isn't about their general programming. It has to be tied to the very specific scope of work. So as an example, we might say an organization will refer 10 young people to mental health counseling in the first quarter. And so we would see that in their report, and then they would be paid based on that work.
And then just one more question. How did you consider the amount of people being served when you looked at the review process? Because when I'm looking, some of the groups that didn't get considered would help significantly more youth than, for example, one group that is getting $25,000 and they plan to serve 12 to 14. So how was your criteria for that?
Yeah, so we really stuck to the providing the mental health services, and it's the full set of criteria. But the specific example that I think you bring up is with the Hmong community. And one of the things the reviewers talked about was those deeply underserved and that communities don't access resources. And this is very tied, like you kind of have to gauge the depth of impact the service will have. And some services are more expensive than others. So inviting 20 young people to an art class might have a broad reach and you'll get a lot of kids, but 20 young people in a weekly session with a counselor might actually help improve mental health in a different way. So it's one of the hard parts about just the comparing of the service and the depth of impact the service intends to make. Some services are going to be more expensive. I think the other thing too is some programs have other funding that they can leverage that covers some costs in some of the programs, and others wouldn't have that same leverage.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments about this information? Councilmember Larmer.
I just want to say, great presentation, Lori. I'm really, excited that we're able to have this added to the budget because I think it's really timely, and I think you guys have done an excellent job really reaching out to those underrepresented populations. And I really like the targeting and what I'm seeing about the programming. So I look forward to seeing the results to the I forget what you called it, but the performance metrics
indicators
coming back in. So I'm really, really proud and really hope that we did this, and really hope that we can see some measurable results for our youth coming out of a very difficult year. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Fincher.
I want to just echo that. I'm also happy to see the different types, recognizing a few of these, the different types of therapy other than just talk therapy that'll be offered also. So very good job. That's a lot of hard work that went into that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Lori. We are going to move on to consultant service agreement. This also requires council action, and Eric's going to present.
Well, good evening. Thank you for having me tonight. I'm here to request the committee to authorize a consultant services agreement with KBA for our upcoming South 212th Street Overlay project. KBA is a firm that specializes in construction contract administration for local municipalities on federally funded projects. 212th Overlay is a federally funded project that will provide 33,000 square yards of new asphalt paving, the replacement of 12 existing concrete curb ramps, and 275 square yards of asphalt of sidewalk repairs between East Valley Highway and 72nd Avenue. The second slide was a couple photos of the existing roadway, big part of the reason we're doing the project. And then the last slide is a couple photos of ramps that we'll be bringing up to ADA standards. So with that, I'm requesting approval to the contract with KBA in this project to provide full contract administration and inspection for this project. KBA will provide a resident engineer, a subconsultant for quality control, and a contract administrator. This small staff will perform all inspection, federal documentation, and project coordination and communication with city staff, the contractor, and WashDOT local programs office. Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time tonight. And if you have any questions about the project or this presentation, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Anyone have any questions about this? Everyone good moving it forward to consent? All right, thank you for joining us, Eric.
All right, thank you.
Next up, we have payment of bills. We all get that through emails, so we will move that on to consent. And then Paula, you will talk about an interlocal agreement with the file local for the City of Kent business license.
All right, good evening, everybody. I am Paula Painter, Finance Director, and in front of you I have an interlocal agreement with File Local for the administration of the city's business licenses. So the RCW requires that any city that requires a business license for a business to do activity within their city must join either the state business license system or File Local. And we've reviewed both systems and have selected to go with File Local. Now, File Local is a municipal corporation that really does make it easier to and more efficient for local businesses to apply for both their business licenses as well as file their local B&O taxes. And about a year ago, the legislature granted the city of Kent an additional year to be able to join File Local. Initially, it was required to be done by July 1 of 2021. It's been extended, or excuse me, of 2020, and it's been extended to 2021, July 1st. Beyond that date, we would be required to join the state system. Now, File Local is made up of 10 other cities. And the great thing with this is not only does it have the ability to help with the administration of business licenses, but in the future, it would provide us with an opportunity, should we choose to join, to also file B&O taxes. So our local businesses would be able to handle both functions in one area. On Tuesday last week, I think that was Tuesday, the 18th last week, might have been Thursday, File Local had their board meeting in which they passed a resolution which modified their interlocal agreement to add the city of Kent as a principal city. Now, being a principal city, we will have the opportunity to assist with the management of the agency as well as being a voting member on the executive board. Approving this interlocal agreement would be the step that we need to take in order to ensure that we meet our July 1 implementation date. Now, costs have come back for the implementation, and the maximum estimated cost is looking to be about $104,000. That cost right now is actually high. We have already found some modifications that we would be doing to some of our customization to take that price down. Right now, we have about $8,600 that will be reduced by that just by changing how we're numbering our business licenses. Just a simple thing like that. So the implementation costs include their standard setup as well as all of the customization that we need. We have to have special customization because of how we do calculate our business license fees. And then we have other business needs that drive some of what we need, that system, data we need that system to be able to collect. Rental housing inspection program is one of those such things. Once we get past the implementation of that on an annual basis, we will be required to pay for our share of the reimbursable costs as well as the capital recovery costs. Now, those are estimated to be about $18,000 per year. And for 2021, it will be reduced based on our go live date of July 1. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Anybody have any questions for Paula? All right, so is everyone good moving this forward to consent? All right, we'll move it forward to consent. Thanks, Paula.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and that brings us to the end of our agenda this evening. So thank you to anyone joining us and watching. Have a great evening, everyone. We are adjourned.